What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing a KLX 110 plastic swap. Check it out. So a lot of people love the new style KLX 110 plastics. A lot of people like the old style, but if you want to switch it up, this is exactly how you can do that. I'm going to walk through start to finish. Whether you have a Chinese bike like I have here that's got the old KLX 110 style plastics, or you have an actual KLX 110 02 to 09, if you want to convert to the 2010 plus plastic setup, this video is going to show you how to do exactly that. We're going to start on the front end first. It's the easiest way to get into it. It's super simple, a couple little modifications, and I'll show you how much it drastically changes the aggressiveness and the front end look of the bike. And then I will go ahead and pull all the rest of this nasty stuff off so we can get the back converted. There's going to be a little bit of welding involved. It's very, very minor. I'm going to use a MIG welder. I'm not going to take the time to take all this stuff, but pretty basic. And we're going to cut the battery blocks out as well. Since this bike is not electric start, we won't have any issues converting or fitting the battery portion of that plastic setup. So to get started with removing the front fender and the number plate, you're going to need an 8mm socket, a 10mm socket, and a Phillips head screwdriver. And you should be pretty much good to do all the plastics with those simple tools. You may or may not have a brake cable guide. If so, make sure you take that out so you don't get caught in your cables when you go to pull the plate away. And then for the underside of your fender, it's most likely going to be a 10mm, it could be an 8mm. This one's got 4 bolts, sometimes they have 2. For the front fender, we're going to open up these 2 lower holes. We're going to go this way to the right and this way to the left. What I'm going to do is take a drill bit, like I've got right here. You can see I've already started. A little bit of green residue on there, and I'm going to open up these holes a little bit. So I'm just going to hold the drill bit with one hand, hold the fender with the other, and push in that direction to walk the bit out. Now I'm not using a huge drill bit. This is a little bit bigger than the bolt size I'm using, and again, this is a front fender, so it doesn't need to be, you know, super precise, but we don't want to have massive holes. So we're just going to walk out this way a little bit, and it'll bolt right up. I'm done drilling these 2 lower holes out, and you can see they're kind of ovalized now, and that's fine because you're using an M6 1.0 with a big fender washer, so you're not gonna have any problems with the bolt pulling all the way through, and it should line right up and bolt on. Now looking at the fender first, there are 4 holes. This is gonna be to align the number plate, and these 2 are gonna go to the bottom of the clamp. So although the stock front fender had 4 bolts holding it in, 2 is definitely more than adequate, and that's what we're gonna do. Before you put the fender on, you want to make sure that you don't have a tab like this on the front of the fork. This was to align the original number plate. We're not running that anymore, so this can come off. You can use it for something else, set it aside, but just make sure you get it out of the way so it doesn't stop the fender from sitting all the way flush with the bottom of the triple clamp, and it won't get in the way of our number plate fitment. So now we're ready for the number plate. I'm just gonna run this right behind the brake line like so, and then you'll notice I cut the strap off. You can leave yours, you can cut it off. It's really personal preference, but with taller bars, it typically will not reach and go all the way over the bar pad, which is why I like to remove them. And there we go, the front end's done. So now we can move on to the rest of the bike. And we've got 8 mils on both sides. We have 8 mils back here, and then we're gonna throw all this directly in the trash. Now one thing I need to mention is we are not going to use a different fuel tank. A lot of people think you can't run the older generation tank with the newer plastics, and you can. The fuel tank's not gonna tighten down against the shroud like it does on the 2010 plus bikes, but it won't matter when you have the side brackets and everything else in place. So just bear with me and we'll get there and you'll see how it all works. So everything's pulled off. To get started on the rest of this, you do not need a new seat to do this. You can use the 02 to 09 seat or style seat that you may or may not have. And you know, obviously this is bent. We already talked about that. So I got to bend that out, but that is not important to you. What is important is that this rear little fender area is going to have to come off. The new one is essentially built into this rear battery tray fender design. Now this has been slightly modified. We're going to cut a lot of this stuff out. We really only need these 2 holes here to mount it, and those 2 front tabs will be nice. If we can use those, we will. And that's pretty much it. So I've got to move a few things. Now first, I'm going to throw this on the fuel tank and show you what it fits like and how easy it is to just set right on top there. Now we do have these 2 side brackets that are going to have to get modified. This one right here is going to have to go or be changed, and then same for the other side. And depending on which bike you have, if it's a true KLX, they bolt to the frame. If you have one of these, it bolts to the oil cooler apparently. So when I set this in position, you set it over your cap. Be careful of your petcock, fuel filter, whatever you've got in the way. If you have a legitimate tank, it will bolt right here. If you do not, it won't. But it won't matter because we're going to secure it here and down here. Throw the cap on there, squint at it, and you just thought it was a 2021, right? It looks pretty good. Very simple to do. Also, another thing you may notice is that the number plate here sits forward a little bit. It should maybe sit back a hair just like that. So if it does bug you, you can add the zip ties or make a bracket like we talked about. Just doesn't bother me that much. Maybe I'll change my mind later. But overall, it makes a massive change, and we're only halfway there. So this is in position. I'm going to take this stuff off and mess with the rear one and show you what the fitment is like for that. I'm gonna have to bend this back straight off camera so it's not in my way, but you get the idea. So give me a second to do that, and then we will come back to this rear fender mounting. Okay, so I got that stuff out of the way, this rear setup. I got the exhaust bracket bent back to what appears to be mostly straight. The header rotated as well, so that's great. And I put the number plates on just so you can see. Now they do have like a locking tab on the side here, so they're not, you know, actually mounted. They're just kind of chilling in position where I think they need to be. And this is mostly so we can make sure our seat alignment is correct and our rear fender is correct. Now you do have these 2 pins right here, and this is gonna help massively with making sure that everything is in proper alignment. But the rear fender will not fit in place looking like this. Now, like I said, it's already been ground down a little bit, as you can tell, to fit a different application, but you don't have to do that. You just have to decide if you want to cut it here and get rid of this battery tray and these 2 front mounts and just use these 2 and these 2, or if you want to cut off this tab here. Now, I don't really have any reason to cut this tab off and to keep that tray, so I'm gonna look at it a few more times, and I'm probably gonna end up cutting this off straight across right here. Another thing to note is that on the newer KLXs, they have a different subframe on the left side of the bike, and that is because they want you to be able to slide this battery in and out of this tray right here. Since you don't need that, you don't necessarily have to worry about this, which in turn means you don't have to modify the subframe here like many might think, at least initially. Now, we're gonna have to move these tabs here. They're both too far forward, as you can see right there. The placement is not correct, and we're gonna have to change some other stuff with the seat mounts and all that. But we're not quite there yet. We're just eyeing it out to see what our game plan really is. You can see we've got clearance here. The number plate may need to be cut out a little bit, but first and foremost, we're gonna get this rear fender mocked up so we can make sure our seat line is correct. And then we're gonna worry about things like these plastics being bolted down here, the front, and then the sides, and get it all wrapped up and dialed in. To modify this fender, I'm just gonna use my angle grinder as I always do. I'm gonna cut a little loose or cut a little far to the opposite side of where I want the cut line to be. And that way, if I make a mistake, I'm not completely screwed. Using an angle grinder to cut plastic will throw hot pieces of plastic all over the place. Just be prepared for that. And if you get hot plastic on you, it's sticky and it's hard to get off. And by the time you have removed it, you'll already have burned yourself. So just keep that in mind. Simple enough. It definitely slides into place, and I could have left a little bit more to keep dirt out of this area, but I just don't really care. But keep that in mind if you do want to save a little bit of mud from getting up in here and you don't want to build like a different flap essentially to cover that area. You could let this come down a little further and maybe meet up with this piece right here, and that would allow you to keep some of that dirt out of like the under seat area. Alignment wise, on this side, I'm having a problem with the number plate. When I go to align it with this hole here, everything somewhat lines up, but I'm hitting right there. So I can either trim the number plate or I can trim the subframe behind it. And then over here, it actually fits significantly better. It's a little hard to do one-handed. So with the dowel pin lined up, the fender is sitting pretty well, and like I thought, we're gonna have to move that subframe mount. Now you'll notice the number plate is hitting that right there. Probably gonna go ahead and clean that up, grind that down a little bit to fit around the subframe. And then same goes for this side. It's a lot easier to trim the number plate than it is to trim the frame, especially when there's really nothing behind it that can go away. So we wouldn't gain a whole lot of clearance. It really just depends, and it depends on what you want to see. If you want to look at your bike and see a factory looking number plate, it's easier just to not mess with it. Or if you think you might change your plastics out every couple years or every year, then of course it might be easier to just modify the subframe and not have to grind your plastics every time you replace them. Because I've got this in a pretty rough area and we know it's close, before I grind any number plates or do anything else, I want to mount this because these locking tabs position these number plates, and then this does the same. So until we know this is 100% not going to move, we don't really want to build any other bracketry or anything like that. So next is to test fit the seat. So I'm going to pull this stuff off so it doesn't fall off and get scratched. I'm going to place the seat in position on my tab right here, set it down flat, hook it into my fuel tank here, and see what we're looking like, and then we can test fit the fenders again and see if we're still on track. This is just an eBay replacement seat. It was like 25 bucks. It's got the tall foam. Honestly, it's pretty nice. I don't know how long it will hold up, but worst case scenario, I'll just buy another cover for it and use the same base and the same foam. It's nice and firm, which is what I like. And we have our locking tab like we did before, and our rear tabs that are actually attached to the plastic and not zip tied and duct taped to our frame. The main thing to pay attention to here is this line right here with the seat against the plastic, and then also the rear. So I've got my seat almost lined up with the mounting holes, and I'm actually gonna bolt the seat in without the number plates on to hold it in position before I actually make anything permanent. But when I pop this up, what you're looking to do here is make sure the seat is maxed out in the forward direction. Push back down. Now you can see that my my bolt holes are lining up with my seat. And then once it's there, you want to lift this up into place and make sure that the rear seat line is proper against the fender. So there's no big gaps. Everything looks right. Remember, we are dealing with a lot of Chinese parts here that may not be as accurate, but typically this stuff lines up pretty good. Doing a little more checking, and forgot to clearance the fenders down here, the number plates. So I'm going to go ahead and clearance that. You can see my terrible Sharpie line. It gives me an idea on both sides where I want to open things up. So I'm going to do that real quick, test it once more. So I opened up the number plates, and it was beneficial on both sides. Obviously it had to happen. You can see that little cutout there. Just use a flap disc and then clean it up with a like a little bit of Scotch-Brite at the very end. That was pretty straightforward. Now this right here needs to be tucked inward, so you can see it's kind of bowed out, and if you look at the line of the seat, it's sticking out more right there. It needs to fit tight. So there's where it's relaxed, and that's where it needs to be. It's minimal, but it allows the number plate to sit underneath this seat line right here. So that's the next step. I'm going to work on tucking these in. I'm going to cut some small tabs out of 16 gauge sheet metal, and then they're going to have a hole that I'll probably use a riv nut or like a threaded insert rivet, but it will essentially just tie it into the subframe right there. I'm going to do that on both sides. Now when I'm doing this, I need to make sure the seat line doesn't change. I like how the seat sits right now. They can't really change much because we've got mounting holes back here, and the fuel tank is only going to move so much. So this movement right here, this up and down of this shroud, does change a lot if you look at that gap that's created, and it needs to be kind of like that, like pushed downward to allow for it to fit really, really tight, and it also sets my number plate up for a smooth and clean fitment. So I made 2 small tabs, put a small riv nut in there, and then I just bent it a little bit to conform to the subframe. I'll clean these edges up afterwards. I don't, you know, it's not like a priority of mine, but basically it will sit right behind there, much how I have this side positioned, and kind of leans on the subframe, and then I can weld it into place. I'll tack it on both corners, then I'll pull the plastics off so I don't melt them, and then fully weld it. So I got to pull this stuff off and prep this to be welded, so I'm just going to flap disc it down a little bit and clean it up so it can be raw metal, and then I can weld it together, and then we can move to the next thing. So when I do this, after it's prepped, I'll put the seat back on and check once more and just make sure that this is positioned correctly up and down. Then I'll add my tacks, check it yet again, and then we can move forward. And the very last thing will be these front lower shroud brackets that go right here. As long as this stuff is right and the seat is lined up, this isn't gonna go anywhere, but it would be nice to add them so you don't have this, you know, vibration or this like flexing of the front shroud. All right, so I got my little tabs welded on. I got them on both sides. And like I said before, I'll clean up those sharp edges once I get everything done. I'm not really too worried about it, but it will be nice to round those corners off and just give them like a little bit of a smooth surface so I don't catch anything on them. But now this goes back on. We'll redo the seat. We'll check that one more time. Check the number plates. Move these tabs, do the number plate mounts, and then do the rear fender mount. And then we're almost done. We do the shrouds, call it a day. So looking at the number plates, I threw the muffler on and I checked all of my clearances. I'm gonna use these holes, and depending on your bike, it could be different. On the KLX that I did, the actual Kawi KLX frame, I used the forward hole and that seemed to be accurate. In this situation, for whatever reason, the rear holes are what line up with pretty much everything. So that's just how I'm gonna do it. Again, not rocket science here, just, you know, figure it out and make it the best way you can. If you have to, you can drill your own hole and weld a nut to the backside or whatever. And then this I still gotta figure out, so I'm gonna have to do like a mounting bracket up here that ties into here or the end of these tubes. The factory KLX has like a bar that runs across like this. We're not gonna get that crazy, there's really no need, but it's gonna look something similar. This has required some clearance. I've been notching it out just a little bit, and it's gonna take a little bit more. The next thing I'm gonna do is weld the lower fender mounts. So when this is positioned, it is important, like the height of your rear fender, and most of that is gonna be decided by the seat itself. So I'm gonna get these locked into these pins, brought all the way, the pins locked into the rear fender, bring them all the way up and tack it. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut off those lower factory mounts right there. There's a good chance I can just move them up a little bit on the subframe mount, which will save me time from making a separate bracket. And then we'll be, you know, that much closer. All right, so I grinded the number plate and it fits really nice. You can see the clearance there. There's a little bit of plastic left over, but I'll get that at the very end. But regardless, it fits tight. This is touching, which it's touching right here, so we know that we're nice and even. And the idea with that is that when you look down at the bike, the number plates are, you know, similar, symmetrical, or matching as much as they can, and it looks like a normal setup. So we got those good, and then what I did is I put a bolt in up here and a bolt in up here on both sides, and I made some small tabs. I wasn't able to use the factory ones. I did cut them off, but they're just too short. They don't reach. So those are gonna go, and then you can see I've got my new ones in position. I used the rib nuts again, and the main reason for doing this is if you ever strip them out, you can just drill them out and change them or cut them off or whatever. Whereas if it's a nut, you gotta like either tap it or cut it off, grind it, and weld a new nut on. So this just works simpler for me, and I like using them. I use steel ones. They're a bit more robust than the aluminum, and I've got them on both sides. So now I'm gonna grab my MIG, I'm gonna tack each one as quickly as I can, and then pull the number plates off, fully weld them out, and then we'll move on to the last step, which is making this bracket here for this, and then somehow attaching it to the top of the subframe. I got these tacked up, and I went ahead and welded them. I'm skipping filming the welding clips, mostly because I don't have a lens to protect my camera lens from the weld arc. I've welded before in the past, and I feel like it's affected the lens negatively. So anyway, a MIG weld is a MIG weld, you know what it looks like. But you can see I've got one tab over there, one tab over there. So we're good. I'm gonna let those two cool down. I'm gonna put the number plates back on. I will get the rear fender positioned. We'll work on that top mount. We can put the seat on to double check everything and pretty much wrap it up. The two front shroud mounts, and if you look at it right here, you can tell it's sitting mostly like this. And it's easy to adjust, but it's mostly just because this is not the right tank and everything's just kind of chilling on there. So the rear two mounts are tight, but all of this has some adjustment, and we'll fix that when we get to it. For the rear fender mount, we're just gonna use these two holes right here. I'm gonna use like a fairly strong plate. I don't want it to flex. If I used 16 gauge like I did for the number plate mounts, it would definitely not be strong enough. And a lot of times when you sit here, you slide back on the fender, and there is a fair amount of weight back in this area. So we want it to be strong. So I'm gonna add a plate here. I'm gonna nut and bolt it rather than using a nut serge, just because I don't have the depth that I did here, where there's all this space behind this area where there's nothing going on. So it'll look a little bit more factory. I'll nut and bolt it to a plate that'll get welded to this. That will be done, and then we can move up to our shrouds. All right, she's all welded out, threw some paint on it, didn't really even clean it very much, don't really care, oversprayed the exhaust, also don't care, but it looks a lot better, or at least it will when it's all assembled. So last thing to do is these front mounts, and this one is actually really, really close. So I think I can use this one, I just can't use the one on that side. So that one's gonna get redone, and then the entire setup is finally complete. I can roll it out and shoot it off, get rid of all this old dirt and grime that's probably hasn't been washed in quite a while. So get that cleaned up. For this one, I'm probably just gonna build a bracket that drops from here down. I might weld it, but I might not. I don't really wanna take it off. I might just do like an extension. I don't know, that's kinda ghetto. I'll probably weld it, we'll see. I got my shrouds on, and I've got my two rear bolts in. The cap is on, holding the cover all the way down, and it sits really well so far. I've just got this side tightened with a bolt and a nut. It's hand tight, and it's sitting pretty close to where I want it. You can tell this side is drooping just a little bit, but there's a slot on there, which is nice, and all of this is still loose, so that can go down. So all I gotta do is position that exactly where I want it, and then make a bracket for this side. If you look in here, you can see it's really not gonna reach, and there's not a whole lot I can do to make that bracket work, but I can extend it. I'm gonna drop it down, and then I'll have a bolt come through with a nut on that side, and we'll be completely done. We can assemble the whole bike and see if it was worth it. I found this in my scrap bin. It's pretty close to what I need. So what I'm gonna do is bolt it to the shroud. It's a little tough to do with one hand. You get the idea. Sits right there, bolts up right there, and that way everything is held together. Again, I know this is not the best route, and obviously with other things like my trucks or my cars or whatever, I take more time. But this is just to show you guys how to make a bike that looks not that good, look a lot better for cheap. And if you wanna make a different bracket, you're gonna have to most likely. It's obviously up to you, but this is a way to get it done fast. And look how good this thing looks. From China bike to not China bike, but still China bike. Yeah, I got both sides of the shrouds tight. They're nice and center. It may be hard to see on the stand, but they're very close. And there is some adjustment. And then I actually switched seats. So fun fact, not all eBay seats are created equal. And this one sucked. It was actually like really short. So when I mocked everything up, I was using both seats and I really wasn't paying attention, which has kind of been the entire theme of this process. But you know, whatever, my mistake. So the other seat was like coming up short, and I'm like, how is this possible? It fit perfect. Well, that's why that happened. So anyway, this seat fits a lot better. It's a little torn up. I've just had it from you know, some China bike that I bought, and I got the seat. So it works, it's okay, it looks pretty nice. Overall, I'm super stoked on the bike. I'm gonna get it outside and wash it. I'm gonna throw some different bars on it, and I'll shoot a thumbnail. Then I'll post this, and I hope this video helps you guys. If you are, you know, trying to convert a bike that you just want to make it look a little cleaner, or you got an old KLX, you don't want to run a battery, but you're really interested in running the new stuff, the new plastics, and they're not even new anymore. You know, these came out in 2010, so if you're interested in doing this, I really hope this video helps you. Just take your time. If you want it to be dialed, obviously spend more time on your brackets, get everything perfect. If you follow this video to the T, you now have a brand new looking bike for, I don't know, $100 plus your time, whatever you want to value that at. Pretty solid if you ask me. Peace out.
Love you like, swear I got you in her, swear I love you in her, swear I need you in her, swear I got you in her, swear I know you like I always love you in her. Wanna love you but I can't love you like, swear I got you in her, swear I love you in her.